The tears burned hot trails down Bethany Keating's cheeks as she knelt in the freshly turned earth of Sweetwater Cemetery. The small wooden cross bore her husband's name, Michael Keating, dead at 27 after the stagecoach robbery that had left her a widow at 24. Her fingers traced the rough-hewn letters as thunder rumbled in the distance across the Texas plains. "I don't know how to do this without you, Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of a sorrow that seemed impossible to bear. May 1875 had brought more heartache than she'd ever known possible. She didn't hear the approaching footsteps, didn't sense the tall figure standing respectfully behind her until a shadow fell across the grave. Startled, Bethany looked up, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun to see a stranger, a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes the color of the prairie sky after rain. "Pardon my intrusion, madam." His voice was deep, gentle as he removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "I've been meaning to pay my respects." Bethany quickly wiped her tears, straightening her black mourning dress. "Did you know my husband?" The stranger nodded, his expression solemn. "Preston Irwin, madam. I was on that stage. Your husband saved my life." The words struck Bethany like a physical blow. In the 3 weeks since Michael's death, no one had been able to tell her exactly what had happened, only that he'd died bravely. "He saved you?" she whispered. Preston nodded, his weathered hat clutched respectfully against his chest. "When those bandits opened fire, he pushed me down. Took the bullet meant for me." His voice grew rough with emotion. "I've been tracking the men responsible. Just got back to town." Bethany's fingers dug into the earth of the grave. "Did you find them?" "Yes, madam. They won't hurt anyone else now." He didn't elaborate, and Bethany didn't ask. A fresh wave of grief washed over her, and she couldn't hold back the sob that tore from her throat. She bent forward, shoulders shaking with the force of her sorrow. Preston knelt beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Mrs. Keating, I know there aren't words for this kind of loss, but I owe your husband everything." He hesitated, then said softly, "I'll carry the weight with you now. Whatever you need, a fence mended, supplies hauled, protection, you have it." Bethany looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. The stranger's face was kind but determined, with a quiet strength that reminded her painfully of Michael. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Irwin." "I owe your husband my life," he replied simply, "and I pay my debts." Thunder rumbled again, closer now, and fat raindrops began to fall, spattering the dry earth of the grave. Preston stood, offering his hand. "Let me see you home, madam. Storm's coming." Bethany hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm, steady as he helped her to her feet. For a brief moment, the overwhelming weight of her grief felt fractionally lighter. "Our farm is 3 miles east," she said softly, "though I'm not sure how much longer it will be mine." Preston's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The bank's calling in loans all over the county. Without Michael—" Her voice faltered. "I have until the end of summer." As they walked toward her wagon, the rain began to fall in earnest, and Preston draped his coat over her shoulders. The unexpected kindness nearly broke her again. "Mrs. Keating," he said as he helped her onto the wagon seat, "I meant what I said. Your husband's sacrifice isn't something I'll forget." He paused, raindrops sliding down his weathered face. "I'll be around, if you'll allow it." Bethany nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in her throat. As she took up the reins, the strange cowboy's words echoed in her mind. "I'll carry the weight with you now." She couldn't imagine how any of this burden could be shared, how the yawning void Michael had left could ever be filled. But as she drove away, leaving Preston Irwin standing in the rain by her husband's grave, Bethany felt something she hadn't experienced since the day the sheriff had appeared at her door with his hat in his hands. The faintest flicker of hope. The rain had turned the dirt road to mud by the time Bethany reached the small farmhouse she and Michael had built together. Their dream 40 acres of good Texas land with a creek running through it now seemed to mock her with every creaking board and leaking roof tile she couldn't fix alone. As she unhitched the horse and led it to the stable, Bethany thought of the stranger at the cemetery. There had been something in his eyes, not pity, which she'd grown to despise over the past weeks, but understanding, as if he knew what it meant to lose everything. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Bethany rose before sunrise as she had every day since Michael's death, determined to keep working despite the futility. The farm required constant attention, and there simply wasn't money to hire help. She was struggling with the water pump when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Hand shading her eyes, she watched as a familiar figure rode up the cowboy from the cemetery. Today she could see him more clearly. He wore simple, well-worn clothes, a gun at his hip, and a face weathered by sun and wind. Not young, but not old either. Somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed. "Morning, Mrs. Keating," he called, dismounting with easy grace. "Mr. Irwin?" she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Preston, please." He led his horse closer. "I hope you don't mind my coming by. I thought you might need some help with the morning chores." Bethany's pride bristled. "I can manage." A small smile touched his lips. "No doubt. But 4 hands work faster than 2. He gestured to the stubborn pump. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Bethany stepped aside. With a few deft movements, Preston had the pump working smoothly. "Needs a new washer, but this'll hold for now." "Thank you," she said stiffly, unused to accepting help. "Your husband built this place?" Preston asked, looking around at the modest but well-constructed buildings. "Yes. We came here right after we married. 4 years ago." Memories washed over her Michael cutting logs, both of them working side by side, dreaming of the future. "He had good hands." Preston nodded. "I can see that." He paused. "If you wouldn't mind showing me around, I'd like to see what needs immediate attention." "Mr. Irwin." "Preston." "Preston," she conceded. "I appreciate the gesture, but I can't pay you." "I'm not asking for payment, Mrs. Keating." "Bethany," she corrected automatically. "Bethany." The way he said her name, careful, respectful, made her look at him more closely. "I told you yesterday I owe your husband. Let me help." For a moment she considered refusing. But the truth was, she was drowning in work, in grief, in the impossible task of maintaining a farm alone. Finally, she nodded. "The roof on the barn needs patching before the next rain," she said. Preston smiled, a warm expression that softened his weathered features. "Then that's where we'll start." Over the next several hours, Bethany watched in quiet amazement as Preston worked with quiet efficiency. He patched the barn roof, fixed a broken fence section, and helped her feed the livestock. His movements were economical, practiced the work of a man accustomed to hard labor. "Have you been a cowboy long?" she asked as they paused for water. Preston took a long drink before answering. "Since I was 16. Drove cattle from Texas to Kansas. Worked ranches from here to Montana territory. And now?" A shadow crossed his face. "I've been tracking those men for almost a year. They robbed a bank in El Paso, killed a friend of mine. I followed them all the way to that stagecoach." Bethany's hands tightened around her cup. "I'm sorry about your friend." "As I am about your husband." His blue eyes met hers, holding a depth of understanding that needed no words. They worked until dusk, and when Preston finally mounted his horse to leave, Bethany found herself reluctant to see him go. "Will you?" she began, then stopped, unsure how to frame the question. "I'll be back tomorrow, if that's all right," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "That eastern pasture fence won't fix itself." Relief washed through her. "Thank you, Preston." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Bethany." As she watched him ride away, Bethany realized she'd gone an entire day without crying the first since Michael's death. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but somehow the weight of it felt marginally lighter. That night, for the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming of Michael's blood on her hands. True to his word, Preston returned the next day, and the day after that. He never mentioned payment, and though Bethany tried to offer what little she could, meals, fresh eggs, gratitude, he seemed content with the work itself. A week passed, then two. June arrived with blistering heat that scorched the fields and tested even the hardiest farmer's resolve. Bethany and Preston established a rhythm, working side by side from dawn till dusk, speaking little but accomplishing much. Townsfolk began to notice. When Bethany rode into Sweetwater for supplies, she felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispers behind raised hands. "Awful quick to find another man," Martha Wilson murmured to Sarah Jenkins as Bethany passed in the general store. "And that Irwin fellow, where'd he even come from?" Sarah replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "Drifter, if you ask me. Probably after her land." Bethany stiffened but kept walking. Her back straight, chin high as Michael had taught her. "Never let them see you flinch," he'd always said. That evening, as Preston helped repair a chicken coop, Bethany finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Don't you have somewhere to be? A job waiting?" Preston's hands stilled on the hammer. "No, madam." "But surely you can't just stay here indefinitely." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "I suppose that depends." "On what?" "On how long you need me." The simple statement hung between them in the humid evening air. Bethany felt her cheeks warm, though she couldn't say why. "People are talking," she said finally. "About you being here." Preston resumed his work, driving a nail with precise force. "People always talk. Question is whether you care what they say." "I don't," Bethany replied, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. "But you might. Your reputation, my reputation." A wry smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Keating, I've been a cowboy, a ranger, and a bounty hunter. I've slept under stars more nights than in beds. The only reputation I care about is whether a man or woman keeps their word." He set down the hammer. "I gave my word to help you. The rest doesn't matter." Bethany studied him. This enigmatic man who had appeared at her husband's grave and somehow become essential to her survival. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you really doing this?" Preston was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I've seen too much death, done things I'm not proud of." "Your husband?" He swallowed hard. "He didn't know me from Adam, but he gave his life for mine. That kind of debt can't be repaid, but I can try to honor it." His honesty touched something in Bethany, a place that had been numb since Michael's death. Before she could respond, Preston stood, brushing sawdust from his pants. "Getting dark. I should head back to town." Bethany watched him gather his tools, a sudden thought occurring to her. "Where are you staying?" "Boarding house on Main Street." "That must be expensive." Preston shrugged. "It's a roof." Bethany took a deep breath. "We have a spare room. In the house." At his surprised look, she hurried on. "It would make sense. You're here from dawn till dusk anyway. And I can't pay you, but I can offer room and board." "That's not necessary." "It is," she interrupted. "If you're set on helping me, then let me offer what I can in return." Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this arrangement was crossing some invisible boundary. "What would your husband think?" Preston asked quietly. The question caught her off guard with its directness. "Michael was practical," she answered honestly. "He would say it makes sense." Preston considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right then. I'll get my things tomorrow." As Bethany prepared the spare room that night, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Having a man under her roof, a virtual stranger, went against every convention of proper behavior. Yet Preston Irwin had proven himself honorable in every way, and the truth was, she was tired of being alone with her grief. The next morning, Preston arrived with a single saddlebag containing all his worldly possessions. Bethany showed him to the small room off the kitchen that had once been intended for the children she and Michael had hoped to have. "It's not much," she apologized, suddenly seeing the space through a stranger's eyes, the narrow bed, the simple dresser, the faded curtains. "It's more than enough." Preston set his bag down carefully. "Thank you for your hospitality, Bethany." The use of her given name no longer seemed presumptuous. In fact, she couldn't imagine him calling her Mrs. Keating anymore. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table together, sharing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. The domesticity of the moment struck Bethany forcefully. How quickly they had fallen into this arrangement, how natural it felt despite its impropriety. "Tell me about him," Preston said suddenly. "Your husband." Bethany's spoon paused halfway to her lips. No one had asked her about Michael since the funeral, as if people were afraid speaking of him would shatter her. "He was kind," she said finally, setting down her spoon. "Stubborn as a mule, but kind. He could look at a broken thing and see how to fix it. Not just machines or furniture people, too." A small smile touched her lips. He was the only person who could talk old Mr. Jenkins out of a temper. Everyone said he should have been a preacher instead of a farmer. "How did you meet?" "At a church social. I was new in town. My father was the school teacher. Michael asked me to dance, stepped all over my feet, then apologized by bringing me wildflowers every day for a week." Preston smiled at that. "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Bethany's throat tightened. "The best I've known." They were quiet for a moment. The ticking of the mantel clock the only sound in the room. "What about you?" Bethany asked finally. "Have you ever been married?" Preston shook his head. "Never found the right woman. Or maybe never stayed in one place long enough to look properly." "No family?" "Had parents in Missouri. Both gone now. Brother died at Shiloh." "The war?" "Of course. Like so many men his age, Preston had lived through those terrible years. It explained something about him, the watchfulness, the way he positioned himself to see doors and windows." "I'm sorry," Bethany said softly. Preston nodded his acknowledgement, then changed the subject. "That south field, you planning to plant it?" They spent the rest of the meal discussing farm matters. The personal moment passed, but not forgotten. Later, as Bethany lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about her house, she realized something startling. For the first time since Michael's death, she felt safe. The days lengthened into summer, the June heat giving way to July's even more punishing temperatures. The farm began to show the results of Preston's labor-mended fences, a repaired roof, fields tended with care. Bethany found herself working alongside him, her own strength returning as the sharp edge of grief began, ever so slightly, to dull. They fell into an easy rhythm. Preston rose before dawn, starting chores, while Bethany prepared breakfast. They worked through the morning, paused during the worst heat of the day, then continued until dusk. Evenings were spent on the porch, talking quietly as the fireflies emerged. Bethany learned that Preston had fought for the Confederacy, though he spoke little of those years. He'd been a Texas Ranger briefly after the war, then a bounty hunter tracking the worst offenders across the territories. He could read and write well, enjoyed poetry, a fact that surprised her, and played harmonica with surprising skill. In turn, she told him about growing up in Ohio, moving to Texas with her father after her mother's death, meeting and falling in love with Michael. She spoke of their dreams for the farm, the family they'd planned, the future they'd imagined. Sometimes talking about Michael brought tears. Preston never looked away or tried to change the subject when she cried. He simply waited, offering a handkerchief or, occasionally, a gentle hand on her shoulder. One evening in late July, as they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Preston asked a question that took her by surprise. "Do you think you'll stay, if the bank calls in the loan?" Bethany's hand stilled on her mending. "I don't know. I haven't thought beyond trying to save the place." "And if you can't?" She considered the question seriously. "I suppose I could teach, like my father, or work in a shop in town." Neither prospect held much appeal. "Why do you ask?" Preston was quiet for a moment, watching the colors deepen across the horizon. "I've been thinking about your situation. The bank wants payment by the end of August?" "Yes. $300. He nodded slowly. "There's a cattle drive leaving from the Gregory Ranch next week. They're short-handed." Bethany stared at him. "You're leaving?" "No," Preston said quickly. "Not unless you want me to, but I thought I could join for the drive to the railhead. 2 weeks' work would pay $50, maybe more. But the farm would be in your capable hands for 2 weeks," he finished. "You've learned every repair I know how to make, and it would get us that much closer to what you need." Us. The word hung between them, significant in its casualness. When had Preston's help become a shared endeavor rather than an obligation to a dead man? "I don't expect you to contribute to my debts," Bethany said carefully. Preston's eyes, blue in the fading light, met hers directly. "I know you don't, but I'm offering all the same." Something in his steady gaze made Bethany's heart beat faster. She looked away, focusing on the distant line of trees that marked the creek. "I can't ask that of you." "You didn't ask. I offered." His voice was gentle but firm. "This farm was your dream with Michael. I'd like to help you keep it if I can." Bethany felt tears prick her eyes, not from grief this time, but from a complicated emotion she couldn't name. "Why?" she whispered. Preston was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Because in all my wandering years, this is the first place that's felt like it could be home." The words hung in the cooling evening air, charged with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Bethany's hands trembled slightly as she resumed her mending. "Then I accept your offer," she said softly, "and I'll be here when you return." Preston left for the cattle drive the following Monday, riding out at dawn with promises to return in 2 weeks' time. The farm felt strangely empty without his presence, quieter, larger somehow. Bethany threw herself into the work, determined to prove she could maintain everything in his absence. The days passed slowly. She found herself looking up at the sound of approaching horses, only to be disappointed when it wasn't Preston. At night, the house seemed too silent without the reassuring sounds of his movements in the next room. On the third day after his departure, Sheriff Miller rode up to the farm, his expression grim. "Afternoon, Mrs. Keating," he said, removing his hat. "Mind if I have a word?" Bethany wiped her hands on her apron, anxiety curling in her stomach. "Of course, Sheriff. Is something wrong?" "That depends." He dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. "Been hearing talk about a man staying out here. Fellow named Irwin." "Mr. Irwin has been helping with the farm," Bethany said carefully. "He's currently away on a cattle drive." Sheriff Miller nodded slowly. "And are you aware that Preston Irwin spent 2 years in Huntsville State Prison?" The words hit Bethany like a physical blow. "What?" "Released in '73, manslaughter charge." The sheriff watched her reaction closely. "You didn't know." "There must be some mistake," Bethany said, her voice faint to her own ears. "Preston was a ranger. Before that, yes, man's had a complicated life." Sheriff Miller's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Keating, I'm not here to cause trouble. but a woman alone, taking in a man with Irwin's history. Folks are concerned. I appreciate the concern, Bethany said stiffly, but Mr. Irwin has been nothing but honorable. He's helped save this farm when no one else would. The sheriff studied her for a moment. Just be careful, madam. Men like Irwin, they carry darkness with them. After he left, Bethany sat on the porch steps, mind reeling. Prison, manslaughter. The words seemed impossible to reconcile with the man she'd come to know, the man who carefully relocated spiders rather than killing them, who spoke softly to frightened horses, who listened to her stories about Michael with genuine interest. Yet hadn't there always been something in Preston's eyes, a shadow, a weight that spoke of a difficult past? Hadn't he himself said he'd done things he wasn't proud of? For the remainder of Preston's absence, Bethany wrestled with what to do with this information. Should she confront him? Ask him to leave? Pretend the sheriff had never come? By the time Preston was due to return, she'd made her decision. She would ask him directly. Whatever his past contained, she wanted to hear it from him. The sound of hoofbeats announced his arrival late on the 14th day. Bethany stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the setting sun as Preston rode up, his figure silhouetted against the golden light. "You're still here," he said as he dismounted, relief evident in his voice. "Did you think I wouldn't be? Thought maybe you'd come to your senses about letting a drifter stay on your property." His smile faded as he took in her serious expression. Something happened. Bethany took a deep breath. Sheriff Miller came by. Preston went very still, his hand frozen in the act of removing his saddlebag. "I see. He told me you were in prison. For manslaughter." A muscle worked in Preston's jaw as he slowly lowered the saddlebag to the ground. "Yes." "Were you going to tell me?" "Eventually." His eyes met hers, direct despite the pain in them. "Once I was sure you wouldn't ask me to leave. And now?" Preston's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'll pack my things." "I didn't say that," Bethany said quickly. I need to understand." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Let me see to my horse first." Bethany waited on the porch, watching as Preston tended to his mount with the same care he showed in all his tasks. When he finally joined her, he seemed older somehow, the lines in his face more pronounced. "Can we sit?" he asked. They settled into the porch chairs that had become their customary evening spots. Preston removed his hat, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Bethany had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "It was 1870. He began without preamble. "I was working as a ranger near the Mexico border. There was a man, Silas Dawson, smuggling guns to raiders. Bad business. We'd been after him for months." Preston's gaze fixed on the distant horizon as he continued. "Finally tracked him to a saloon in a little border town. I went in alone, mistake number 1. He wasn't alone, mistake number 2. There was a girl with him. Couldn't have been more than 16. When I tried to arrest him, he grabbed her, used her as a shield." His hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "I had my gun on him. Told him to let her go." He started backing toward the door, still holding her. Then he pulled a knife. Preston's voice grew rough. "He cut her throat right in front of me, then threw her at me while he ran." Bethany's hand flew to her mouth. "My God." "I fired. Hit him in the back." Preston's eyes met hers, haunted. "That's not how the law works. Not even for men like Dawson. I knew better, but in that moment—" "You were trying to save her," Bethany said softly. "She died anyway, blood everywhere, and I shot an unarmed man in the back." He looked down at his hands. Ranger Captain was a fair man. Testified that Dawson had just killed a girl, that I was trying to prevent his escape. Judge reduced the charge from murder to manslaughter. Gave me 5 years. I served 2. The silence stretched between them as Bethany absorbed his story. Finally, she asked, Is that why you were on that stagecoach? With Michael? Preston nodded. After prison, I started tracking the men who'd worked with Dawson. Not as a ranger anymore, just a man with a purpose. Followed the last of them onto that stage. His voice softened. If your husband hadn't pushed me down when the shooting started, you would have died instead, Bethany finished. Yes. Preston's gaze was steady despite the pain in it. So now you know. I'm not the honorable man you thought. Bethany considered his words carefully. I think a dishonorable man wouldn't have told me the truth just now. Wouldn't have spent 2 months helping a widow save her farm. Wouldn't have gone on a cattle drive to earn money for my debts. Hope flickered across Preston's weathered features. Then you don't want me to leave? No, Bethany said quietly. I don't. The relief on his face was palpable. Thank you. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. Speaking of the cattle drive, he pulled out several folded bills. $62. Boss paid extra for good work. Bethany stared at the money more than she'd seen at once since Michael's death. Preston, I can't. You can. He interrupted gently. It's for the farm. For the loan. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the money, and Bethany felt an unexpected warmth at the contact. Thank you, she whispered. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of Preston moving about his room, Bethany realized something had shifted between them. His revelation, rather than driving them apart, had somehow brought them closer, as if the final barrier of secrets had been removed. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge what her heart had been trying to tell her for weeks. Her feelings for Preston Irwin had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization should have brought guilt. It had been barely 3 months since Michael's death, but instead, she felt only a quiet certainty. Michael would have understood. He, more than anyone, had believed in second chances. August arrived with relentless heat and increasing pressure from the bank. Despite Preston's contribution from the cattle drive, they were still over $100 short, with only weeks remaining before the payment was due. We could sell the south pasture, Preston suggested one evening as they reviewed their options. Gregory might buy it. He's always looking to expand. Bethany shook her head. That's the best grazing land. Without it, we'd never build the herd Michael planned. They had been over this ground repeatedly, each potential solution carrying its own impossible compromise. Sell livestock they needed for breeding, borrow money they couldn't repay, part with land essential to the farm's future. There's one option we haven't discussed, Preston said carefully. The bounty on the Cassidy brothers. Bethany looked up sharply. Bounty hunting? Preston, no. $200 for James Cassidy, dead or alive. He was last seen near Fort Worth. It's too dangerous. Preston's expression was gentle but determined. I've done this work before, Bethany. I know how to find men who don't want to be found. You also know how it can end, she countered. You told me yourself these men don't surrender easily. No, they don't. He didn't try to sugarcoat the reality, but it's a chance to save the farm without compromising its future. Bethany stood, moving to the window to hide the tears threatening to fall. And what about your future, Preston? What happens if you don't come back? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had voiced aloud. Preston came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, though he didn't touch her. I'll come back, he said quietly. I have reason to. She turned to face him, suddenly tired of pretending. Do you? His blue eyes held hers, searching. You know I do. Bethany's heart hammered in her chest. Say it then. Preston took a careful breath. I care for you, Bethany. More than I should, given the circumstances. The circumstances being my husband's death? Or your past? Both, he admitted. I came here to repay a debt, not to. He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. Not to fall in love? Bethany supplied, the boldness of her words surprising even her. Preston's expression softened. Is that what this is? I don't know, she answered honestly. I only know that the thought of you not returning terrifies me more than losing this farm. His hand came up slowly, hesitantly, to touch her cheek. Then I'll find another way. The gentle brush of his fingers against her skin sent warmth cascading through Bethany. For a moment she leaned into his touch, allowing herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing between them. Then reality reasserted itself, and she stepped back. We need to be practical. The payment is due in 3 weeks. Preston nodded, respecting her withdrawal. Then let's be practical. What skills do we have that could earn quick money? They spent the evening listing possibilities: Preston's abilities with horses and guns, Bethany's cooking and sewing. None seemed likely to generate the needed funds in time. As Bethany prepared for bed that night, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Preston standing there, expression animated. I've got it, he said. The horse race in San Antonio next week. Prize is $200. Bethany frowned. But we don't have a racehorse. Thunder could do it, Preston said, referring to his sturdy bay gelding. He's fast, Bethany. Maybe not as fancy as those thoroughbreds, but he's got heart. It's a long shot, she cautioned. Long shots are better than no shots. Preston's enthusiasm was infectious. And it's a damn sight safer than bounty hunting. Despite her doubts, Bethany found herself smiling. All right, San Antonio it is. They left for San Antonio 3 days later, Thunder following behind their wagon. The journey would take 2 days each way, leaving just enough time for the race before the bank payment was due. Traveling together brought a new intimacy to their relationship. They camped under the stars the first night, talking late into the evening about everything and nothing: childhood memories, favorite books, dreams deferred. In the firelight, Bethany found herself studying Preston's face, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his expression softened when he looked at her. What? He asked, catching her gaze. Nothing, she said, suddenly shy. Just, thank you for everything you've done. Preston's eyes held hers across the fire. I started helping you because of a debt, Bethany. That's not why I'm still here. The simple admission hung in the night air between them, honest and unadorned. Neither spoke further on the subject, but something had shifted in acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be ignored. They reached San Antonio the following evening, securing a modest room at a boarding house near the racetrack. Preston insisted on sleeping in the stable with Thunder, both to guard the horse and to protect Bethany's reputation. The morning of the race dawned clear and hot. The racetrack bustled with activity: wealthy ranchers with sleek thoroughbreds, gamblers placing bets, spectators in their Sunday best. Among the shining coats and gleaming tack of the other horses, Thunder looked decidedly ordinary. Don't let appearances fool you, Preston told Bethany as they prepared Thunder for the race. This horse has more heart than any of those fancy animals. Bethany stroked Thunder's velvety nose. Do you really think he can win? I think he can surprise everyone, Preston replied, tightening the saddle cinch. Sometimes that's enough. As race time approached, Preston grew quiet, focused. He'd been a competent horseman as long as Bethany had known him, but now she saw something more: a deep connection with the animal, an intuitive understanding of what would be required. Be careful, she said as he prepared to mount. Preston paused, then leaned down and, in a moment of unexpected boldness, pressed his lips to her cheek. For luck, he murmured. Bethany's skin tingled where his lips had touched. Before she could respond, he had swung into the saddle and guided Thunder toward the starting line. The race was 3 times around the track, just over a mile. Bethany found a place along the rail, heart pounding as the horses lined up. Thunder was clearly the outsider, drawing amused glances from spectators and outright dismissal from the other riders. When the starting pistol fired, the thoroughbreds surged forward, their long legs eating up the ground. Thunder and Preston started more slowly, settling into fifth place in the field of 7. Bethany's heart sank as she watched the distance grow between the leaders and Preston. But as they completed the first lap, she noticed something. While the thoroughbreds were running all out, Preston was holding Thunder back slightly, conserving the horse's energy. By the second lap, as the early leaders began to flag in the heat, Thunder maintained a steady pace. Entering the final lap, Preston was in third place and gaining. The crowd, initially dismissive of the plain bay gelding, began to take notice. Cheers rose as Thunder passed the second-place horse on the back stretch. Only the leader remained a sleek black stallion, whose owner had been particularly contemptuous of Thunder's chances. The gap between them narrowed as they rounded the final turn. Bethany found herself shouting along with the crowd as Preston urged Thunder forward. The bay gelding responded with a burst of speed that no one except perhaps Preston had known he possessed. Neck and neck, they ran down the final straight, Thunder gaining inch by inch until, in the last strides, he thrust his nose in front. Thunder had won by less than a length, but he had won. The crowd erupted, none louder than Bethany. Preston's face as he guided Thunder back to the winner's circle was transformed by joy and pride in his horse. When his eyes found hers in the crowd, the connection between them was palpable. Later, with the prize money secured and Thunder enjoying extra oats for his efforts, Bethany and Preston celebrated with a proper dinner at a small restaurant near the boarding house. For the first time since Michael's death, Bethany wore something other than black. A deep blue dress she'd packed on impulse. "You look beautiful," Preston said simply when she appeared. The compliment brought color to her cheeks. "Thank you. And thank you for today for everything. The farm is saved." Preston raised his glass. "To Thunder. And to new beginnings." "New beginnings," Bethany echoed, meeting his gaze over the rim of her glass. They talked easily throughout the meal, the shared victory and relief creating a bubble of happiness around them. As they walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Preston offered his arm, and Bethany took it without hesitation. At her door, they paused. Suddenly shy despite the day's intimacies. "I should check on Thunder," Preston said, though he made no move to leave. "Of course," Bethany replied, equally stationary. In the soft lamplight of the hallway, she studied his face dear to her now, in ways she couldn't have imagined when they first met at Michael's grave. The realization struck her forcefully she had fallen in love with this man. The knowledge should have brought guilt, but instead, she felt only certainty. "Preston," she said softly, gathering her courage. "I need to tell you something." His eyes, warm and blue as a summer sky, held hers. "What is it?" "I've realized. My feelings for you have changed." She took a deep breath. "I care for you. As more than a friend." Preston's expression softened. "Bethany." "I know it's too soon," she hurried on. "I know it seems disloyal to Michael, but I also know he wouldn't want me to be alone forever." "It's not that," Preston said gently. "I feel the same way. Have for some time now." His hand came up to touch her cheek, a ghost of a caress. "But I need to be sure you're certain that it's not gratitude or loneliness speaking." "It's neither," Bethany assured him, leaning slightly into his touch. "It's you, who you are, what you've become to me." For a moment they stood suspended in possibility. Then, with infinite gentleness, Preston lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, tender, a question more than a demand. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for confirmation. Bethany answered by reaching up to draw him back to her, their second kiss deeper, a promise rather than a question. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he murmured. Never thought I'd find someone again, especially not you. Especially not like this. I know, Bethany whispered. But here we are. They returned to the farm 2 days later. The prize money secured and a new understanding between them. Though nothing in their daily routine changed outwardly, everything felt different. Each shared glance, each casual touch was imbued with new meaning. The bank payment was made with days to spare, ensuring the farm's security for another year. With the immediate crisis averted, Bethany and Preston began to plan for the farm's future and, tentatively, their own. August gave way to September, bringing the first hints of autumn to temper the Texas heat. They worked side by side as always, but now there were stolen kisses behind the barn, hands that lingered when passing tools, evenings spent closer together on the porch swing. They were careful, mindful of Bethany's recent widowhood and the town's watchful eyes. But in private moments, their growing feelings found expression in words and touches that healed wounds both had carried too long. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Preston turned to Bethany with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what happens next." Bethany's hand found his. "What do you mean?" "Winter's coming. Proper folks might wonder about our arrangement." He cleared his throat. "And I've been wondering, too, about what we are to each other now." "Are you asking to court me officially, Preston Irwin?" Bethany asked, a smile playing at her lips despite the seriousness of the conversation. "I'm asking if you might consider marriage," he replied directly. "Not right away. I know it's too soon after Michael. But eventually." The proposal, for that's what it was, took Bethany's breath away despite its practical framing. "Preston, you don't need to answer now," he hastened to add. "I just wanted you to know my intentions are honorable." Bethany squeezed his hand. "I never doubted that." She took a deep breath. "And yes, I would consider marriage. When the time is right." The smile that transformed Preston's face was worth any amount of town gossip. He leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle promise of futures aligned. "I should speak to Reverend Thomas," Preston said when they parted. "Do things properly." Bethany nodded, appreciating his respect for convention despite their unconventional beginning. "And I should visit Michael's grave. Tell him." "That you're moving forward?" Preston suggested gently. "Yes." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were different from the desperate grief that had consumed her months ago. "He would want that, I think. From what you've told me of him, I'm certain of it." The next day, Bethany rode alone to Sweetwater Cemetery. The wooden cross marking Michael's grave stood as she'd left it, though summer rains had settled the earth. She knelt beside it, running her fingers over the carved name as she had that day in May when Preston had first found her. "Hello, Michael," she said softly. "I've come to tell you something important." The cemetery was quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "I've met someone. His name is Preston Irwin. You saved his life on that stagecoach." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "He's a good man, Michael. Different from you in many ways, but good in the ways that matter. He's helped me save the farm, our dream." Bethany wiped her eyes. "I'll always love you. Always. But my heart has room for him too, it seems." She touched the cross one last time. "I hope you understand. I hope, wherever you are, you're at peace, knowing I won't be alone." As she rose to leave, Bethany felt a weight lift, not the weight of grief, which would always be part of her, but the weight of uncertainty. She would love again, live again, build a future different from the one she'd planned with Michael, but no less meaningful. Preston was waiting at the farm when she returned, his expression questioning. "Are you all right?" Bethany nodded, dismounting to stand before him. "I am, and I've made a decision." She took his hands in hers. "I don't want to wait, Preston. Life is too uncertain, too precious for that. If you're still asking, my answer is yes. Joy bloomed across his weathered features. You're sure? Completely. She smiled through fresh tears. Some people will talk, say it's too soon. But I don't care anymore what people think. I only care what's in my heart. Preston drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. And what does your heart say? That I love you, Bethany whispered against his chest. That somehow, in the midst of the worst grief I've ever known, I found a love I never expected. Their wedding took place on a crisp October day. A small ceremony attended by the few townsfolk who had supported Bethany through her widowhood. Reverend Thomas spoke of new beginnings, of God's grace in bringing light from darkness. Bethany wore a simple dress of deep blue, the color Preston had first complimented with wildflowers in her hair. As they spoke their vows, Bethany thought of that day at the cemetery, of Preston's quiet promise. I'll carry the weight with you now. He had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined, helping her bear not only the practical burdens of the farm, but the emotional weight of loss and uncertainty. Now, as his ring slipped onto her finger, she made a silent promise of her own, to carry his burdens too, to be the home his wandering soul had sought, to love him with the same steadfastness he had shown her. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thomas declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Preston's kiss was tender, reverent, a pledge before God and community of the commitment they had already made in their hearts. That evening, as they stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, Preston wrapped his arms around Bethany from behind, both of them gazing out at the land they would tend together. Happy? He murmured against her hair. Yes, she answered honestly. Not in the way I expected to be, but deeply happy all the same. Preston turned her in his arms to face him. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you, Bethany Irwin. You already are, she told him, reaching up to touch his face. You have been since the day you knelt beside me at Michael's grave and promised to help carry my burden. As night fell over their farm, stars emerging in the vast Texas sky, Bethany felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Life had taken an unexpected turn, bringing sorrow beyond measure. But it had also brought Preston a second chance at love she hadn't known to hope for. She thought of Michael, certain somehow that he would be at peace knowing she had found happiness again. The grief would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the whole of it. In Preston's arms, Bethany found home, not the one she had planned, but the one she needed. A place where past and present could coexist, where loss and love were equally honored, where the weight of living was carried by two instead of one. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. As the seasons changed, the farm prospered under their joint care. Preston's knowledge of horses combined with Bethany's careful management expanded their operations beyond what she and Michael had initially planned. By the following spring, they had added a small herd of cattle and improved the irrigation to the south pasture. On the anniversary of Michael's death, they visited his grave together. Preston stood respectfully back as Bethany placed wildflowers by the wooden cross, now weathered by a year of sun and rain. I miss him still, she told Preston as they rode home. I think I always will. As you should, he replied, understanding in his eyes. He was your first love, the man who built this place with you. That doesn't diminish what we have, it's part of what made you the woman I love. His words, simple but profound, confirmed what Bethany had come to know, that real love didn't demand erasure of the past, but embraced it as essential to the present. 2 years after Preston had first found her weeping at Michael's grave, Bethany gave birth to their daughter. They named her Hope, a testament to what they had found in each other. As Preston held his newborn daughter, wonder transforming his weathered face, Bethany thought of all the unlikely turns that had led to this moment. She's perfect, Preston whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. She is, Bethany agreed, watching the man who had become her heart's second great love embrace fatherhood with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. Our little miracle. One of many, Preston said, looking up to meet her eyes with so much love it nearly overwhelmed her. And he was right. Their life together was built on a foundation of small miracles. The chance meeting at a grave, the decision to help a stranger, the slow healing of two wounded hearts, the courage to begin again. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, Preston often took her with him on his rounds of the farm, the little girl perched securely before him on his saddle. Bethany would watch them from the porch, her heart full beyond measure at the sight of Preston pointing out birds and cattle to their wide-eyed daughter. By the time Hope was 3, Bethany was expecting their second child. The farm had grown prosperous enough to hire occasional help, though Preston still insisted on doing most of the work himself. His past as a bounty hunter seemed a distant memory now, replaced by the identity he had grown into: husband, father, farmer. "Did you ever imagine this?" Bethany asked him one evening as they sat on the porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand gently caressing her rounded belly where their second child grew. Hope was already asleep inside, her small bedroom once Preston's when he'd first come to stay. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "When I rode up to that cemetery and saw you there." He shook his head, still amazed at the turn their lives had taken. "I was just trying to repay a debt. I never thought I'd find a home, a family." "Michael saved your life that day on the stagecoach," Bethany said softly. "But you saved mine in a different way. I don't know if I could have kept going without you." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're stronger than you know, Bethany Irwin. You would have found a way." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." She took his hand, placing it where their child had just kicked. "We're building something beautiful here, Preston. Something that will last." Their son was born as summer gave way to fall, a healthy boy they named Samuel Preston Irwin. With 2 small children and a thriving farm, their days were full from dawn until dusk. But in quiet moments, evening walks along the creek, stolen kisses while the children napped, shared glances across the dinner table, the love between them continued to deepen. 5 years after their wedding, a letter arrived that changed Preston's life once more. His brother Jacob, the one he'd believed died at Shiloh, was alive. Wounded severely in the battle, he had spent years recovering, his memory compromised. Only recently had he remembered enough to begin searching for his family. The reunion between the brothers was emotional for both men. Jacob, still walking with a pronounced limp from his war injuries, marveled at the life Preston had built. "When I knew you, little brother, you couldn't stay in one place more than a month," Jacob said as they sat on the porch, watching Hope and Samuel play in the yard with their mother. "Now look at you, husband, father, farmer." Preston smiled, his eyes following Bethany as she chased their laughing children. "I found what I was looking for," he said simply. "Though I didn't know I was looking for it." Jacob stayed for a month before returning to his own life in Missouri, but the connection restored between the brothers added another dimension to their growing family. Letters flew back and forth, and plans were made for future visits. As the years passed, the farm prospered, and their family grew. A third child, another daughter they named Elizabeth, completed their family. The difficult beginnings of their relationship receded into memory, though neither ever forgot the circumstances that had brought them together. Occasionally, someone new to the area would ask how they met, and Preston and Bethany would exchange a glance, sharing the private understanding of a story too complex for casual conversation. "We met at the cemetery," Bethany would say simply. "Preston helped me through a difficult time." It was true, if incomplete, the full story of grief and redemption, of second chances and unexpected love, belonged to them alone. On their 10th anniversary, Preston surprised Bethany by taking her to San Antonio, back to the racetrack where Thunder's victory had secured the farm's future. The horse, now retired to pasture, had sired several promising foals that formed the foundation of their modest breeding operation. "Remember that day?" Preston asked as they stood at the rail, watching sleek thoroughbreds thunder past where Thunder had once raced. "How could I forget?" Bethany smiled, leaning into his side. "It was the day I realized I was falling in love with you." Preston's arm tightened around her waist. "For me, it was earlier that day you asked me to stay at the farm, when you trusted me despite knowing nothing about me." "I knew enough," Bethany replied softly. "I knew you were a good man who kept his word." Later that evening, in the privacy of their hotel room, Preston gave her a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he urged. Bethany did, finding inside a tiny painting of their 3 children on one side and, on the other, a pressed wildflower. "From Michael's grave," Preston explained gently, "the kind you put there that first day. I wanted you to have something that honors all of your journey, the love you lost and the love we found." Tears filled Bethany's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift at this man who had never asked her to forget her past, but instead helped her integrate it into their shared present. "I love you, Preston Irwin," she whispered, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "More than I ever thought possible." His kiss was as tender as the first they had shared, yet deeper with the knowing that comes from years of shared life. "And I love you, Bethany Irwin. Every day, more than the day before." As they held each other in the quiet room, Bethany thought of that day at the cemetery, of Preston's simple promise. "I'll carry the weight with you now." He had kept that promise through all the years since, through childbirth and drought, through prosperity and hardship, through all the ordinary miracles of daily life. And she had kept her own unspoken promise to be the home his wandering heart had sought. Together, they had built a life neither could have imagined on that grief-stricken day beside a fresh grave. A life of purpose and joy, of deep love and abiding faith in second chances. It wasn't the life Bethany had planned with Michael, nor the solitary existence Preston had expected after prison. It was something unexpected and precious, a testament to the heart's capacity to heal, to grow, to love again. And as Preston held her close under the Texas stars, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that this life, this love, this family they had created together was exactly where she was meant to be.